Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm PVSB, the secret agent CPG guy. My domains of expertise revolve around content on the digital shelf, retail, customer data insights, CRM, and loyalty. And this is usually where I introduce my co-host, the superhero CPG guy. He is an expert at branding, D2C, unified commerce, retail media, and marketplaces. Unfortunately, Sri can't be with us today, so I'm going to fly solo, but I know we've got a really interesting episode for you this week. Before we get to our guest, I want to remind our audience that all of our content, including our series on profitability, our women's leadership series, where Sri and I were very proud to be able to contribute $8,000 to the Susan G. Komen Foundation, and our Q1 Founder Series from this year, and even links to our 1Q1A Instagram series that's got a lot of great people like Britton Ladd, Guru Hariharan from Commerce IQ, Michael Zakor, all of that. You can go all find that. It's a pretty cheap price. It's free, and it's available at cpgguys.com. And finally, we would also ask you, go on to LinkedIn and enter CPG Guys in the search box. And when you get to our page, click follow. We produce not only links to updates of our podcast, but all sorts of other content. Again, it's all free. We just want you to be able to connect with us, and it's a great place to also leave us some feedback. So please do that. Just go to and follow us on LinkedIn. We've got almost 5,400 people who started following us since we launched in June of last year, so it's pretty big. All right. To this week's episode. You may remember that in episode 33, Sri likes me to be really precise, not just say, oh, that episode back in October. He said, no, you got to get the number right. We released as part of our women's leadership series, a conversation we had with my friend and former colleague, Kathy Leuenberg, who is now the chief operating officer at Drizzly, the leading alcohol delivery marketplace platform. Drizzly was in the news recently when it was announced that the company had been acquired by Uber. Very interesting combination. Buy alcohol, want to get it delivered to someone. Uber delivers people. Now they deliver products. Brilliant, right? That was a good connection. And while our audience may well be familiar with the primary business unit of Drizzly, they likely are not aware of Drizzly's other emerging business unit known as Lantern. Lantern is an on-demand cannabis home delivery platform that provides legal, convenient access to cannabis dispensaries and their products. So here to speak with us about this very novel extension of the Drizzly model is the president of Lantern. Please join me in welcoming to the CPG Guys podcast, Meredith Mahoney. Meredith, greetings. How you doing today?
I am doing really well. Thanks for having me here.
Oh, this is terrific because I obviously am so fascinated with the incredible successful growth of Drizzly. And I know in my role at Power Reviews, I have actually been in the background talking with some people at Lantern for quite some time about site experience. So I've been a little aware of this, but it's so great to actually see it out in public and everything that's going on. Before we get to the questions, our audience likes to follow along and research while they're listening. Can you first tell us where they can find more about Lantern online, and then give us a little brief overview of Lantern's business model?
Yes. So our website is lanternnow.com, 2 N's. So really important, lanternnow.com. We are not on the App Store, so go to your web browser and put in Lantern Now. And there's also a lot of news and press on us, so check out anything you find there, searching Lantern Cannabis. I'm really glad that you brought up Drizzly because Lantern was incubated within the Drizzly kind of ecosphere. 2 of the 3 founders that were still in the Drizzly business conceived Lantern. One of those is actually peeled off and is working with me on the Lantern business today. So really exciting. Lantern is essentially the Drizzly model for cannabis, although there's a lot of differences between alcohol and cannabis. You can really think of it as kind of the Drizzly of cannabis. We're an e-commerce marketplace and delivery platform that connects cannabis consumers to licensed dispensaries. And that way, customers can shop product first, which doesn't actually exist out there in the market right now. They can find what they like, they can find the best price, they can discover new products, and then they can have them delivered to their door with technology backing it that can enable those deliveries to be in as little as under 10 minutes in certain markets. So you're getting it on demand when you want it. And what we're hoping to build is an experience that is better than the dispensary. And, you know, a lot of the technology that we use is powered by the Drizzly Foundation. But we've since, you know, spent the last year and a half building our own customized technology that's specific to cannabis.
That is great. And that's a great overview to start us on. Meredith, I think you know about the CPG Guys podcast. We're about education and learning how the sausage is made. So we're going to start decomposing what you talked about and really help our audience understand what's the magic behind the mystique that's being created, right? So let's get right into the questions. So I know that you spent a good part of your career prior to Lantern working on direct-to-consumer businesses, some big notable stints at like Wayfair, which is a familiar online merchant for furnishing, decor, home improvement, housewares. Everybody knows. I can't get the jingle out of my head, right? But what about Lantern drew you to this opportunity and the idea of entering this emerging and intriguing market vertical?
There were a few reasons, and I'll be the first to admit I'm not deep in the category, or I wasn't prior to joining Lantern, but it always was a category that was interesting to me. I think a thread that's gone through my career in my direct-to-consumer businesses is that I've joined organizations that are trying to solve a hard consumer problem. So when I joined Wayfair, it was all about like, how do you get customers to feel confident in buying large furniture online, and then how do you get it to them? It seems really easy today, but back in 2010 when I joined, that was still something that customers weren't comfortable doing. After Wayfair, I ran a small beauty startup, and our focus was non-toxic, natural, clean beauty, which is a really emerging part of that part of the beauty category. But it was hard to understand why it was more expensive. The formats were different than women and men were used to using. So there's just a lot of education and messaging that you had to get right. I love thinking about the consumer journey and how to infuse the right content into the right parts of the funnel, and how the messaging and brand affect the consumer, the relationship you have with the consumer from a trust perspective. And once you start lining all of those things up, they apply to cannabis really, really well, because you have a category that has only really been legal for less than 10 years. And if you think about alcohol has been legal for, 80, 100 years, and cannabis is just at the forefront of being legal. It's not even legal in certain parts of the country, and at the federal level, not legal. So being able to be part of the cannabis industry at this point in its trajectory, with the backing of Drizzly and the experience I have, I felt like it would just be a really great combination to be able to lead thinking, destigmatize the experience, and then bring this category to a lot of consumers that are starting to enter the market.
I agree with you, Meredith. What a huge opportunity to help be at the nascent stage of an emerging vertical as it opens up to the entire country. What a great opportunity. So let's get on to that educational component and decomposing your business. I want to understand, what are the services and capability that Lantern is providing, including the supply chain partnerships? I guess my big question I love to ask is, looking at what you are you a software company? Are you a delivery service? Are you both? Are you more? What's going on there?
This is a loaded question, because it's very important in cannabis to know whether you are a plant touching company or whether you're a non-plant touching company. And what plant touching means is literally touching the product, whether you grow it, produce it, or move it, or sell it in a retail store. Or if you touch the financial piece of it. So if you actually touch the money. We are not licensed because we're a software business. We're considered an ancillary software business that does not need to be licensed. However, I see Lantern while it's a very technology first company and we have to be, I see it more as a way for consumers to shop for cannabis in a way that's new to cannabis, but that is the norm in every other consumer category. So if you think about how, you shop for anything that's not cannabis, you're shopping in marketplaces. You're shopping from Target, Walmart, Sephora, Amazon. You're rarely going direct to a brand to buy a product. There's obviously exceptions, but that experience actually doesn't exist in cannabis today. And the reason that is because the regulations around third-party tech, e-commerce, and delivery have actually lagged far behind in adult use legal states. And so there hasn't really been the opportunity from a regulatory standpoint to build experiences like Lantern. So technically technology and software, but we really influence the full supply chain. So we are partnering with licensed dispensaries, licensed cannabis brands, and then licensed third-party delivery services. And while we don't own those licenses or necessarily have those contracts, we do with some, not with others, all of those pieces contribute to the end-to-end order experience. And so we, Lantern, need to make sure that they're really smooth and working well and operationally sound. So we're really, really involved in dispensary operations, 3PD operations, and then the way that brands are presenting their product information and the imagery, everything you can imagine from the brands, we're all over as well.
You mentioned the brand aspect. We're going to get to that because that's another thing that really interests me. But let's get back to the money because you talked about that aspect of it. I've come to know Drizzly in my operations. I always find it fascinating how Drizzly was able to avoid the restrictions associated with the 3-tier system. People don't understand that when they go to buy Drizzly, that they may think they're paying Drizzly, but Drizzly is just connecting to the merchant system of the individual retailers that are conducting the actual purchase transaction and then delivering the product. So, what fascinates me about Lantern is kind of this added element, and this is what I mean by that. I remember all the publicity around the introduction of cannabis in Colorado. And what was highly publicized was the banking and payment industries overtly avoided servicing this emerging industry. So nope, we don't want you to use credit cards. We don't want you being able to bank with us. And so you had all of these crazy restrictions that put restrictions or in fact, obstacles to consumers being able to buy the product. So can you walk us through how a consumer uses your platform and are able to actually pay for the cannabis that's going to be delivered to them?
Yes, this is one of the fun things about being in a category that has kind of dual legalization, illegal at the federal level, legal in 36 states. So most customers in cannabis today still pay cash. By and large, they're still paying cash, and that is fraught with issues. If you can imagine the last time you ordered something, from anywhere and there was a mistake on the delivery fee and you were overcharged and it just charged your credit card back. We can't do that. We literally have to take $10 back to the customer. There are a lot of payment solutions that have come out, technology payment solutions that have arisen out of the need for innovation. I'd say they're okay, but not great. They're not a good customer experience. It still remains an area of opportunity. But it's also one that should be one of the first areas of the industry to work itself out. The Safe Banking Act, which has gone in front of the House and the Senate several times over the last few years, that is the one that's believed to probably get some traction over the next year or two, and that would enable credit card payments. It would kind of give the credit card companies some coverage there. But to answer your question, the dispensaries that we work with, they each decide how they want to take payment. What are the types of payment methods they want to take? And so out there in the industry, obviously there's cash. There are some solutions that are ACH, and you work with a third party to give them your bank information, and they can debit those orders, or handheld cashless ATMs where your order is $44. You put your debit card in, and it debits using air quotes for everyone not on the audio, it debits $45 actually, however your bank rounds, and then the driver hands you $1 back. So the customer in our order flow, the customer selects which payment type they're going to plan to use at the door, because that's where the payment happens. But it's clunky. It's challenging. People forget they don't have cash when they thought they did. They're not comfortable giving away their, debit card information, even though it is safe and secure. So super clunky part of the order experience. And it'll be great when we can start using credit cards.
I agree. That sounds terrific. That's really very helpful, because it does, what's going to happen ultimately is that as consumers start to demand it, the government's going to have to respond and prompt the availability, because it's clearly going to be an enormous market. And if you are putting obstacles to being able to conduct commerce, that doesn't benefit anyone. It really doesn't. So, legal cannabis sales, well, with the exception of Colorado, are relatively new. I remember I was living in Rhode Island when Massachusetts passed the law. Would you help us understand, as it stands right now, what's the current state of availability, and what's the relative market size of this legal cannabis industry, and where are you able to operate, and what regions are actually emerging, or you're expecting to be able to operate, and how do you go about facilitating that?
So I'm going to throw some stats at you. So today, 1 in 3 Americans lives in a state that has legalized adult use cannabis, and more than half the population lives in states with medical use legalized. So this is in most Americans' lives, whether they're in this category or not. And recent polls have shown that over 70% of Americans actually do support adult use legalization. So what's interesting is there's definitely a disconnect between the electorate and then what the legislators and the governors are interested in doing. Today, 16 states and the District of Columbia do allow adult use, kind of different levels of legalization and licensing, but adult use is legal. And then 36 states have medical legal. And a lot of the medical states are many that you would think of as very conservative, but have actually very big medical programs. The legal cannabis market in 2021 is expected to be around $25 billion and should be in the $40 to $50 billion range by 25. And obviously that depends a lot on which markets legalize and which don't. And then to kind of reference your question, this is just the legal market, and the illicit market is still bigger than the legal market. And there's a lot of reasons for that, including just taxes and how expensive per ounce it is within the legal market. What's interesting about what we do is that our business is based on the idea that people want to have cannabis delivered. And so even though there's 16 states that have adult use consumption legal, there's only 4 states that actually have adult use delivery legal. So we can actually only today operate in 4 states. We're operational in 2, Michigan and Colorado. Massachusetts is just about to license the first delivery licenses. So that will be coming up in the next, I'd say, 6 weeks. And then what's great is that some of the newer states that are just that have just had ballot initiatives or just had the legislatures approve adult use, and now they're going through their regulatory activities, they are contemplating and including delivery in their regulatory process. Where to watch the Northeast. That is where most of the action is going to be happening, the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So as I said, Massachusetts has been legal for 4 or 5 years. Maine, just started licensing in the last year, the first recreational dispensaries. Connecticut's one to watch. That should be coming up soon. New York and New Jersey made huge news in the last few months. New York will take a while to become operational, but that should be the second biggest market in the U.S. after California. And then kind of just going down the Mid-Atlantic, Virginia just kind of made a move there, and we're watching Maryland. So I think for us, we're looking to be in newer markets because our value prop and our the way we want to go to market is definitely deep on education, destigmatized customer experience, safe, legal, accessible, and that really lends itself to new consumers coming into the market versus being in California, for instance. While it's a huge market, there's just a lot of players there that do delivery, and there's just a lot of competition. So we're focused on Northeast and Mid-Atlantic.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you, Meredith. So let's move on to the digital shelf, and particularly the merchandising aspects of the customer experience. So when I think about, again, back to Drizzly and thinking about product search, right? Search is predicated upon pretty well-known brands of beer, wines, and spirits. Like I have my preferred bourbons and my preferred wines, and I know exactly how to find them. So my question to you is, I may be wrong, but I'm not aware that these structures exist in cannabis. I probably am wrong, but that's why I'm asking you. So how do you go about establishing a product hierarchy and content that makes your offerings more discoverable to users? I mean, how do you focus on ultimately executing a superior customer experience, perhaps even better than what the dispensaries themselves may have on sites that they're managing?
So merchandising is a huge pain point for cannabis. Cannabis e-commerce, there's no barcodes, there's no UPCs, there's no standardization. There are seed to sale tracking mechanisms that kind of track the product from the grow through production to retail shelf. But I think it's important to remember this is a plant. And so even if you're producing two of the same thing, they're not exactly the same thing. And so that is probably one of the number one things that the industry needs to solve over the next couple of years. And there are some people who are making good headway there. But with regard to how we do the catalog hierarchy, frankly, we hired someone who was a former dispensary manager and a bud tender, and she just has very deep knowledge of how the customer shops. And what you have to do is you have to create a hierarchy that's flexible, because different people shop different ways depending on what markets they're in, and then also where they are in their cannabis journey. So if you're, a regular user, you always use flower, you always like a certain strain, you're going for price and like how quickly you can get it delivered. If you're newer to market, you may not even know where to start. So we need to enable that product discovery and really make sure you feel confident about your decision. And then there's people that maybe on either ends of that spectrum and or in the middle, and they're just interested in new brands and like what's new to market. Cannabis infused beverages right now are really trendy and are getting a lot of press. And so, how do you make sure people can find those? That's not unlike other e-commerce businesses or marketplaces where you're just trying to always like give the consumer something new to think about and be exciting. I actually think that it's not hard for us to be better than the dispensary experience. The dispensary experience is interesting because there's a lot of regulation around your experience, the experience they can provide. So there's almost always security guards standing outside. There's a waiting area where you don't see anything except someone taking your ID. You have to wait. Then you have to go show your ID again, usually to even get back to where you can buy product. In certain states, you can't even see the product. You see like this bad laminated menu thing. There's no time to talk to a bud tender about discovery or what's new, because you got a line behind you. So, our vision of this is that, if you come to Lantern, all of the information you would get from that dispensary experience is there, but you can take your time and you can compare, and you can really learn and not kind of be rushed through the whole experience. Like I've said this a few minutes ago, but instilling confidence in the purchase is more important in this category than anything else. You're putting it in your body, and people typically don't know a lot about this category. So that's what our job is.
For those in our audience who lived in the Great White Northern Province of Ontario during the 70s and 80s, the dispensary experience that she described, that's brewer's retail. It was a room you walked into, you had a list of beer on the wall, and you'd buy it, and all of a sudden it would come out on a conveyor belt. Not a great user experience. So yeah, you can improve greatly. That's really helpful. Also, I want to thank you, Meredith, for you're throwing out these new industry terms like I heard seed to sale, that's kind of farm to table, and then a bud tender as opposed to a bartender. I love this. This is all fascinating for me. So thank you for this. And that's what we're about here, right? We're trying to educate our audience about this vertical and how consumers engage with it. So we talked a little bit about the fact that Lantern was incubated in Drizzly. Can you share with us any particular benefits that Lantern gets from being part of the Drizzly ecosystem from a resource and capability perspective?
Yeah, so there's all the tangible functional areas that we share. So we share finance, we share HR and people operations. We will be spinning out of Drizzly when the deal happens because Uber can't, acquire a cannabis company at this point, which is actually fine. We're too early in our trajectory to pick our permanent dance partner, I would say. We got to create a bunch of value before that happens. But It was great. We actually, were founded within Drizzly at the end of 2019. We will have spent 18 months within that larger group. And, Drizzly is incredible from a culture and DNA and rigor standpoint. And so it's great to be part of that. I would say less tangible is just having people around you that have done this before and that and so we have all this great technology. When we have, thoughts about account management, we can go to the account management team and say, how did you do it back in 2013? It's not all the same, but there's enough there that's the same that it's really helpful. So, having that connection has been, I would say, an accelerating factor that no one else has, in this industry.
That's great. It gives you a little bit of an advantage in terms of scalability, so that you can avoid some of the pitfalls that the parent company may have experienced in the past. So that's pretty great. So let's move over to the consumer side. I want to understand how you are creating awareness for your business. What are the primary advertising mechanism you're using, and how do you make sure you're doing that in a responsible manner?
So there are lots of regulations surrounding advertising that apply to anyone, not just licensed companies. So they apply to us as well. And those regs make sure that you're speaking to a 21 plus audience and that your messaging is safe and legal and responsible and doesn't have weed leaves all over it and doesn't, happen to catch some 10-year-old's eye. So there's a lot of rigor around the type of advertising and messaging we can do. This is one of the trickier parts of this business. It's actually pretty hard to market in the way that most of your listeners and the way I know how to market in a digital space. Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of those paid digital channels actually don't allow cannabis marketing, advertising, Google included. So most D2C companies at our stage are spending 70 to 80% of their budget in these paid performance channels, and we can't. So, most of our tactics today are upper funnel, out of home, print, direct mail, more like those upper funnel awareness channels, audio, podcast, things like that. There's also a really important community building piece to this. So the markets that we're in, Boston, Denver, Detroit, we're in the community and we're meeting the people that are driving a lot of the kind of both the culture there. But I haven't mentioned this yet. We do a lot of work with the social equity community that's looking to get into delivery. And so we run social equity incubators in our 3 cities, partnered with some really fantastic advocacy groups in Denver and Detroit. They're actually also incredible for getting the word out about Lantern. And then I think in the future, once we get the product built in a way that, and kind of the mousetrap built a little bit further along, it's going to be a category where we have to take some big swings and do some weird marketing and like things that are buzzy. Which is like fun and interesting, but also scary to a bunch of marketers that are, used to tracking every single point in the whole attribution curve. So, it'll be fun, but it's definitely not easy.
All right. Well, my last question to you then, Meredith, is what are the growth or success drivers of your business that you, as the president of Lantern, are spending your time seeking to enable?
So I'll start by saying that what we do is hard to do from a regulatory standpoint. And so I think that's actually our competitive moat, is that it's hard, but we have the resourcing and the expertise and the technology to make it happen. So I thought about this a bit before this. There's 4 things that I think about. I think, do we have the right selection to enable product discovery and help the customer find the right product? Do we have the right information and content in the right places in the funnel to enable confident decision making? Content cannot just sit in a blog somewhere buried in your site. It has to be infused in that journey. Third is, do we have the right operations and technology and logistics to get that order to the customer in a way that's fast, legal, and also stigma free, so that their neighbors are not watching some, weed deal going down. It has to be, in a really accessible way. And then do customers know about us? And I feel like those 4 things are actually kind of ecom 101, but that's just to drive home the point. I think, again, that customers shop for this product the way they shop for other things, and no one else is creating that experience except Lantern right now. So there's a lot of runway for us. And, we think a lot about compliance, and we spend a lot of time on that, but our head of product always says, build to comply, but build to be fly. Like, you need to make sure compliance is in place, but at the end of the day, our experience needs to be differentiated and relatable and relevant to what the customer is looking for.
I want to remind our audience that all of our content, links to the audio podcast on 40 platforms, the link to our YouTube channel, our LinkedIn page, some of our other documents, a list of our favorite podcasts. You can all get that for free. Just go to cpgguys.com and give us your feedback so that we know to invite on really interesting people with great stories like Meredith here. The way to do that, go to ratethispodcast.com, leave a review, maybe a rating while you're there. You can add up to 5 stars. I like 5. I don't, you may like 5 too, but in any event, do that. I will profess that prior to this conversation, Meredith, my knowledge of your industry was predicated upon a Showtime sitcom. I am so glad to know that there is some serious rigor to this business model that you're creating. It's absolutely fascinating. I love how you are focusing on the CX, the supply chain, working through just a myriad of issues. Absolutely fascinating. I'm going to put a link to LanternNow.com in the liner notes of this podcast so that people can find that. I'll also put a link to your LinkedIn profile so people can learn a little bit more about you. I want to thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the legal cannabis delivery business and learning more about Lantern Now. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's really fun to talk about, and glad I was able to bring something new to the table in terms of category information. So thank you.
This is just terrific. What a great conversation. Sorry, Sri couldn't join us today, but he's going to be listening to this along with our audience, and that'll be great. So to our audience, I want to say thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you for the next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Goodbye.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.